All right, guys, looks like it's 12 o'clock. We're going to finish Acts chapter 9 today. It's been a big chapter. We've spent several weeks or several days running in this chapter. It has been mostly about Saul, the conversion of Saul, but here at the end of chapter 9, it gives a note on Peter, and it's going to transition back to Peter here for the rest of chapter 9 and chapter 10 and 11 and moving forward. And so the book of Acts it's just stories of the actions of the early church, of the early believers, and it tries to fit them all together. The second half of Acts, the book of Acts, will primarily focus on Paul, but in the beginning here, you see it goes from one disciple to another. There's Peter and John, and Peter on the day of Pentecost. There's Stephen, there's Philip, there's about Saul's conversion, and it's back to Peter. And there's just a lot of stuff going on, and the book of Acts is very action-packed. It fills it up. So today, the end of chapter 9, I'll read verse 31 here is kind of a capstone verse, and then it moves on to some new things. It says, "The church throughout all Judea and Galilee and Samaria had peace and was being built up, and walking in the fear of the Lord and in the comfort of the Holy Spirit, it multiplied." So the church is doing well. This is in the midst of persecution and hardship, but the church is doing well. And then verse 32, as Peter went here and there among them all, he's just ministering to them all, and they're not all in Jerusalem anymore. He's going to go to different towns, and of course we saw Saul up in Damascus and everything else. It has spread at this point. So Peter is not limited to just being in Jerusalem anymore. So Peter is going here and there among them all. He came also to the saints that lived at Lydda. Lydda's a town. It's like west of Jerusalem, a little bit north, not quite to the Mediterranean Sea, but Jerusalem's in the mountains, and it's down in the coastal plain, I guess you could call it. So he goes to Lydda. He found there a man named Aeneas, who was bedridden for 8 years. He was paralyzed. And Peter said to him, "Aeneas, Jesus Christ heals you. Rise and make your bed." And immediately he rose. And all the residents of Lydda and Sharon saw him, and they turned to the Lord. So it's just a miracle story. We don't know anything about this Aeneas guy. I tell you what, though, I have seen enough people named Ananias and Aeneas here in a couple chapters. It gets confusing. There's Ananias and Sapphira. They lied about money, and they died right at Peter's feet at church. Then there's Ananias, who prayed for Saul to be converted, to be able to see again. And then there's Aeneas here. They're three different people, similar sounding names. I think you can figure it out. They're there, but it does get confusing for sure. So Aeneas is bedridden for 8 years. He's paralyzed. He's in some town called Lydda, and Peter shows up there to minister. It says he's going here and there among them all, and he's going here and there. He's meeting with the believers and ministering to them because he's one of the disciples. He's one of the few who was just close to Jesus out of the thousands of people who've given their lives to Christ in the early couple chapters of Acts. Peter's their leader, for sure. At this point in Acts, if there is a single person who is heading up the church, it would be Peter. So he's traveling around. He's ministering to people, their different needs and stuff, and he finds this guy, and Jesus Christ heals you, Aeneas. Time to make your bed and get up. And he just does. It's a couple verses, and that's that. It reminds me very much, Jesus heals a paralyzed man near the pool of Bethsaida. I think it's John chapter 5. And he tells him the same thing. He's like, "Hey, buddy, pick up your bed and get up. Time to walk now." Same kind of thing. And I imagine Peter is remembering this stuff. And we'll read the next one, and this one really definitely jumps out at you. I'm certain Peter would recognize exactly what's happening here. So verse 36, there was in Joppa a disciple named Tabitha, which translated means Dorcas. So the Hebrew and Greek names, a lot of people would have had two names. She's Hebrew, but her Greek name would have been Dorcas. Okay, so she was full of good works and acts of charity. In those days she became ill and died. And when they had washed her, they laid her in an upper room. And since Lydda was near Joppa, where Peter was in Lydda, was near Joppa, where she is, the disciples, hearing that Peter was there, sent 2 men to him, urging him, "Please come to us without delay." So Peter rose and went with them, and when they arrived, they took him to the upper room. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and their garments that Dorcas made while she was with them. But Peter put them all outside and knelt down and prayed. Turning to the body, he said, "Tabitha, arise." And she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. He gave her his hand and raised her up, and then calling the saints and widows, he presented her alive. And it became known throughout all Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. And he stayed in Joppa for many days with Simon, a tanner. Okay, now that reminds me a lot. You might know the story as well. I'm flipping it over here. I believe it's Mark chapter 5. Yeah, here we go. There's a little girl. They call him. They say, "Hey, come out." It's a guy named Jairus. His daughter is sick and she dies, and they call him there. It's the same thing. They send people to summon Jesus, just like they sent people to summon Peter here in Acts chapter 9. And he goes there. Someone on the way says, "Hey, your daughter's dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They come to the house, the ruler of the synagogue. Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making such a commotion? The child is not dead, but sleeping." They laughed at him, but he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said, "Talitha kumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." Immediately the girl got up and began walking. She was 12 years old, and they're immediately overcome with amazement, and so on. That's Mark chapter 5. So Acts chapter 9, Peter does something very similar here. And the woman's name is Tabitha in Aramaic. And of course, Jesus speaks to this little girl in Mark chapter 5. In Aramaic, he says, "Talitha kum," which means, "Little girl, arise." Peter says, "Tabitha, arise." Her name's Tabitha. It's just a very similar name. It says the same thing. And it's the same idea. There's a big commotion, a whole bunch of people running around, and he puts them all outside. He goes in there, and he's like, "Me and God, we're going to pray. We're going to see this thing through. Tabitha, arise." And she gets up. Now, Peter saw that in Mark chapter 5. He was there when Jesus did it. He's one of the few who was there. Jesus puts the rest of them outside. There's a commotion. There's all this other nonsense. It's a well-known community leader. It's a synagogue leader in Mark 5. In Acts chapter 9, it's Tabitha Dorcas, who is a community leader. Everybody likes her and all this. So it's a well-known local person that's loved in the community. Peter puts all the commotion, all the weeping and wailing, and just, they would really carry on at these sorts of things in those days. It was kind of this whole like production style thing. If somebody prominent dies, everybody shows up and shows off how much they loved them and how much they missed them and how much they mean to them. And it's a way of celebrating the life and mourning the loss. But you get to picture in the New Testament that sometimes it was just very overdone and just kind of annoying. And so Peter puts them all out. Tabitha, arise. You know he's remembering Jesus doing this stuff. You know that he saw Jesus do it, and now he's in the same situation. And if you had said to him back when Jesus did it in Mark 5, "Peter, one day you're going to do this," I don't know for sure what he would have said or done or whatever. I have 2 guesses. One side, he would have probably said, "No way, I could never do that. I'm just, this is a Jesus thing. I couldn't do that." Or on the other side, I could imagine Peter being like, "That's right, someday I will do this. Hey, Jesus, can I sit at your right hand?" Like he had these, he's kind of a polarizing personality that he operated in extremes in his life. But he's remembering this. And the actual position he's in of doing it, he's just remembering Jesus. He's just thinking about Jesus and thinking, "Wow, I saw Jesus do this, and now Jesus is using me to do it." Who cares what he would have thought back in the day, which was only a few years before. But such a radical transformation has come upon Peter. in the time since Jesus died, and Peter denies him 3 times the night he's betrayed. A few days later, he's resurrected. A month and a half later, Peter is leading a new church that's going to expand the globe. This is a guy who he was hacking off the guy's ear the night Jesus is betrayed. A couple hours later, he's denying ever knowing him. Like, Peter has been there and done that, and now he's understanding what it means to be someone through whom the Holy Spirit operates. He's just a vessel. He is a tool. He is an instrument that God is using. Hey, Peter, there's something going on here. I need you to go there. There's a guy named Aeneas who needs a healing, Peter. Somebody has to be there, the hand and the prayer through which I do the healing. There's a lady who just died. Somebody needs to be there so that I can raise her back from the dead through somebody. Peter, that's going to be you. It has nothing to do with Peter. This isn't one of those things where he launches into a big, long sermon like Acts chapter 2. This isn't something where he gets all the credit and all eyes are on Peter for a moment to see what he'll do. This is just God directly at work, doing things in Peter that he had done in Jesus. And I'll ask you this, is there any reason God couldn't do something like that through you? Back when Jesus did it in Mark 5, or John 5, Mark 5 was the raising of the dead girl. John 5 was the healing of the paralyzed man at the pool of Bethsaida. Back when Jesus did that stuff, and you had asked Peter, is there any reason Jesus couldn't do that through you, Peter? He would have said, yeah, there's a lot of reasons he couldn't. I'm prideful. I'm just kind of a fisherman. I couldn't do any of that. I'm a nobody. And now, Acts chapter 9, boom, it's happening. So is there any reason why Jesus couldn't do that through you? Couldn't change you, give you the humble faith, put you in a position? Is there any reason Jesus couldn't do that? I'm sitting beside a sign right behind my head, right, whatever, you see it. It's, I don't know if you can read it. It says, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. It's Hebrews 13:8. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He's not in the same place. Mark chapter 5, John chapter 5, he was at the side of people who needed miracles, raising a dead girl and healing a paralyzed man. Acts chapter 9, Jesus is at the throne in heaven. He's not there, but he's doing it through Peter. Is there any reason he couldn't do it through you today? Any biblical reason why he could not? I think the answer is he could do it. You do hear about miracles. They are happening. They're not just over or something. They seem to be rare right now. These kinds of just outright, straight up raise the dead miracles. I know there's a lot of talk of other sorts of miracles, and in our church recently we had what I believe was a miracle of multiplying food at one of our food giveaways 2 months ago, a month and a half ago. But I mean, there's different categories of miracles, right? Raising a dead person to life at their own funeral, that's like a whole new category of miracle, and I haven't seen that, and I guess you could say they're rare. But is there any reason why you couldn't see that? Is there any reason God couldn't use you? I think the answer is no. I mean, it's yes and no. Yes, he couldn't use you if you are holding sin in your life, if you're holding pride in your life, something like that, where he just wouldn't want to use you. You're not in the right position. But from God's perspective, is there any reason God couldn't do it? No. God can absolutely do that whenever he wants. And Peter, I'm sure, was remembering back to what it was like a few years ago when this was all new and he was seeing miracles come from Jesus, never guessing that one day he would be the guy who gets to stand there and witness a miracle. So you're probably thinking, well, he couldn't use me. I don't know. You're asking me if there's any reason he couldn't. No, there's no reason he couldn't. I just don't see it happening. I don't think Peter saw it happening until he saw it happening. So let's trust God for miracles. Why not? It's the worst thing that would happen if you pray for a miracle and it doesn't happen. Well, you already don't have a miracle, so so there's no loss in praying for a miracle. What would happen if you devoted yourself to the Lord to the point where God was using you for this stuff? Where you just went around and everywhere you went, you encounter something that needs a miracle, you would just pray for it and then it would happen. I think you've got to spend time with Jesus. You've got to have the prayer, the fasting, the just closeness to God and his word. And then you have to go and do it and trust him. And if it takes a couple of years of tinkering around in your faith and being stretched and challenged, then go for it. What do you have to lose? I believe in this stuff. I believe this stuff could happen right now. I believe that God could do this right here within our church in York Springs. I believe he could raise up miracles, just outright miracles and healings. I have to believe that. I read the Bible, and on page 1, God speaks the universe into existence by talking. So we're talking about a God who can do miracles, supernatural. If you believe your Bible at all, then you've got to believe in this stuff. You've got to believe that miracles are the domain of God, and he can do them, and he does do them, and he uses people who aren't very special to do them. And he makes you special because you're in his image, and he died for you. So let's remember that. Let's trust him for miracles. And let's let him start that miracle in our personal lives. In your personal life, the miracle of making you a new person, of giving you new desires, instead of tempted to sin, tempted to righteousness, new things that appeal to you, that prayer time and Bible reading time would be appealing, that you would look forward to it, that you would look forward to visiting people like Peter does and praying for people who are dead or paralyzed or sick or whatever, where your actual desires change because God's made a miracle in you to transform you in that direction. Let's start praying that. The only limiting factor here is, are you gonna get in close with Jesus? Are you just gonna follow him through thick and thin, through big mistakes like Peter made and all kinds of misunderstandings and everything? Are you just gonna follow him closely? That's what we're told to do. That's what we're called to do, and he owns eternity. So why not? Why not follow him closely? I believe in miracles. I believe he wants to do them in your personal life, and I believe he wants to use you to do them in others' lives, just like Peter. God bless you guys. We're going to get into chapter 10 tomorrow, see the next stuff that God does through Peter. Very exciting. Right at noon tomorrow. Tune in, and I'll